He is one of 14 people to ever win an NBA championship as a player and a coach. He has 1,000 career regular season wins under his belt, and he's also the best table tennis player in any room that he steps in the
Oh,
United States. You didn't know that about him?
I didn't know that about him.
Oh, he's nice. It is the head coach of the Indiana Pacers, Rick Carlisle. Coach, how are you doing?
I'm well. I'm not playing much table tennis anymore,
What are you
but
into right
I'm
now?
I'm doing fine. I was playing some back in those days when I was in Dallas.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see you. Where do we find you today?
I'm in Virginia.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
back home. There you go. All right. Well, we're obviously on the 15th anniversary of the 2011 title, which I mean changed our lives to some degree, but I'm sure changed yours quite a bit as
A
well.
little more than ours, I would say.
I can't think of anybody else to talk to more about that time and the memories and just like looking back on it at this point and how the history has changed. But you came here to Dallas in 2008, and I wanted to ask you about your understanding coming from ESPN and coming from other locations about the just all the scar tissue that was here whenever you came in of 2007, of 2006 in the finals, and how you went about addressing that in 2008 because it was a lot of the same players that had gone through all that stuff. So as a coach, how did you step in and go, "Hey, forget that crap, let's move forward"?
Well, anytime you come to a new situation, it is, there is a page being turned, and so we didn't want to look back. We wanted to look ahead. We wanted to make some adjustments. But what you find with coaching when you go into a new situation is that the previous coach, in this case Averie Johnson, who did a tremendous job and won a ton of games and got into the finals, um, was doing a lot of things that were very smart, and we ended up keeping a lot of those concepts in. Um, the mandate was pretty clear. There was a window of about 4 or 5 years where Dirk was going to be, in his absolute prime, and we needed to find a way to get it done within that time period. And so, you know, 2009 was a bit of an uneven year. We had a good ending. On the last day of the season, we thought we won our 50th game to become the eighth seed, but some other stuff happened around the league, and we ended up six, playing against the Spurs, who were three. And it was a good matchup for us, and we won that series, and so we got to the second round. So that year was seen as a positive. And then going into the second year, obviously we wanted to build on that. Second year, we had a rough loss in the first round, which was very difficult for everyone. And then, coming back the third year, we traded for Tyson Chandler, which was a very important move to finish the team off. And, it just, there were some tough stretches. There was the period, late December, early January, where Dirk missed, I think, 11 games because of something happened to his knee in the
Mhm.
game at Oklahoma City late December. Um, and we went 2-9 during those games, and that was tough. But he came back, and then we were able to build it back up, got some momentum down the stretch, and then that year in 11, we were the three seed. Um, and I'll never forget it. I mean, watching the regular season games, the last day of the season, or I should say the last night, and there was a Western game where it was the Lakers were playing Sacramento in Sacramento, and if the Lakers lost, we were going to be playing New Orleans in the first round, which would have been a more favorable matchup than Portland. But Kobe Bryant hit a three late. The thing got to overtime. The Lakers won, and then we were playing Portland in the first round, which was a very difficult matchup and a very tough series. But we got through it in 6 games and actually won the deciding game on the road, which I think was a big momentum builder and confidence builder as we headed into the Lakers series.
When you look back to that season, obviously there's things that go by the wayside because you did end up winning the title, and winning cures all and you forget all the bad stuff. But like the Caron Butler injury always gets pushed to the side by people that are just like, "Oh, remember that year." But what was the most difficult challenge for you coaching through that 2010-2011 season?
Well, coming back that year, we all believed that Rodrigue Beaubois was going to be a very important part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And he was injured in training camp, broke his fifth metatarsal. And so he was out for a long period of time. We all thought that he was going to be an integral part of us being able to take the next step, and be a championship level team. And he ended up coming back around the All-Star break. And he did pretty well as he came back. But as the season was going on, it was tough with him as a starter because we lacked positional size. The period where he missed games I think was difficult for him. To come back and try to get regular season, full season game conditioning was really tough. And so as the thing wound down, he was kind of phased out of the lineup, and Deshaun Stevenson became the starter. And it gave us more positional size, more toughness, more overt attitude as a team. And he was a very important part of our run that year.
Going to Caron real quick, because that was something that was quite a curveball. Tears his knee up on New Year's Day. You hear stuff on the outside of, cliches about next man up and stuff like that. What does it actually look like as a coach when here's a pretty vital piece of your offense, arguably your second best scorer, and it's just over midway through the year? How do you actually re-engineer a team to overcome and kind of overcompensate for a loss like that, especially on the offensive end?
Well, we were deep. We had a very deep roster. And I mean, really, in a way, we had too many guys. I mean, there weren't enough minutes for him and Sean Marion, to both play the three. And, Marion was also playing a little bit of four. But, you don't want to lose a guy like Caron. But in this particular situation, it shored up our rotation. And, it was kind of set. We were 9 guys. Marion would start at 3, bump to 4 when Dirk went out. Dirk would come back in, Marion would come out, and we had a good synergy with the whole thing. And while we missed Caron and we missed the depth, on the one hand, on the other hand, there was going to be some juggling and stuff with the rotation that was going to have some challenges to it. So certainly didn't want to lose him. But the fact that we did, Mark and Donnie had done such a great job building up the roster. And we had Brian Cardinal as a utility guy that could play 3 and 4. And, during periods after Butler went out, when we were having foul issues or maybe somebody get banged up for a game or something like that, Cardinal would come in, and it was amazing the way he could come in and fill in, and he would bring some different elements that would help the team in his own right. So we were able to figure it out from there. And then the other thing that happened was that we signed Stojakovic somewhere. I want to say it was mid to late January, but after we signed him, he had been out for a while. I think he was with Toronto. And so we took about 2 or 2.5 weeks just to work with him to get his conditioning where it needed to be. And then we started playing him. And, I don't remember all the minute details of it, but he had a rough start. And then finally we had a game in Houston where we decided to, I think we started him, and he finally caught a rhythm in that game. And from there, things kind of built up, and he really helped us down the stretch of the season. A lot of folks will remember game 3 of the Lakers series. We're up 2-0. We win the 2 games in LA. We come home, and game 3 was a beast of a game. And Stojakovic had a great game. He was making shots. Lamar Odom kept trying to attack Peja with Peja on defense. Peja was holding his own, at one end, and then he was hitting shots at the other end. And we ended up winning a very, very close game to go up 3-0. And then, the floodgates kind of let loose in game 4, and we got the sweep. But as the season went on, there were elements that were there, so that we could absorb the loss of a guy like Caron Butler.
Yeah, you mentioned Peja and Brian Cardinal, and those guys were vets at that point, and you probably had a handle for what they would bring when called upon. But the favorite thing I think Mavs fans always talk about when they talk about this run is that there was a Peja game. There was a Corey Brewer game. There were multiple J.J. Barea games. There was a Mahinmi game. Did any of those guys that you called upon that got some extra run, extra spots here and there that you were like, wow, I didn't know that guy had it in him. He kind of jumped past what I was expecting him to do in this little time where I was just trying to get some relief in the lineup or whatever.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Corey Brewer because it was game 1 of the Lakers series. So we're on the road. Yeah. We're down 16 in the third quarter. And I remember coming into the coaches huddle, with Terry Stotts and Dwayne Casey. And I said, well, what do you think? Should we throw Brewer in there? Because he was a guy that would just kind of launch himself into games. He was another in-season acquisition for us. And they were like, sounds good. So we threw him in there, and I don't know how many minutes he played, but we went from down 16, and I think we cut the deficit to 3 points. And then from there, we were able to get really close at the end and steal the game. So, we steal game 1 of that series. And then I don't know, I don't know how the Lakers felt about it. It seemed, looking back, like they felt like, okay, all right, well, these guys stole a game, but we'll be fine here. And then we came out and played better in the second game and won the second game. And finally the third game, I mean, they threw the kitchen sink at us in the game that I was referring to, where Peja had the great game. And then finally, we kind of broke them in that game. And then game 4, the building was crazy. We hit a record number of 3-pointers in the game. Jason Terry, Barea, Dirk was going nuts. Kid was hitting shots. It was kind of the perfect storm. And then, all of a sudden, we've got 8 wins, and then we're waiting to see who we play. And I remember, the night after that, the night after we had beaten the Lakers, I think Oklahoma City was playing game 7 against Memphis. And that was to see, who was going to be our opponent. And then of course it was OKC, with their young guns. I mean, and look, they got 3 guys that are going to be easy first ballot Hall of Famers that were playing, with Westbrook, Durant, and of course Harden. So, that series was the next one.
Yeah. What's the biggest thing, before we get in the nitty-gritty of series by series, for you as a head coach? This is obviously, it's your first ring. You've coached more games this season than you ever have. What's the biggest lesson you learn about yourself as a coach going through this whole run?
Well, I'd been in a lot of playoff games before this. Been in, in the conference finals with both teams that I had been with previously, Detroit and Indiana. So, and was involved in, in a finals run when I was an assistant coach with the Pacers with Larry Bird. So, I've been in a lot of these games. As time goes on, though, the game does change. The Mavericks were a different kind of team than I'd ever coached. It was more of a running, jump shooting team than my Indiana or Detroit teams were. The Indiana Detroit teams were more physical, more inside out teams. This was the Mavericks were kind of the opposite, So I was learning some of the nuances of a different kind of roster. And fortunately, Jason Kidd was in an advanced age, but he was still a great player. And Dirk was 33, I think, at the time, and he was, to me, I mean, it's the greatest individual finals run I've ever seen. You look at teams that get to the finals and win now, and in many cases they have, one and usually two MVP candidate type guys on the team. Dirk never really had that in any of the years. And if you look at the metrics and the analytics on him in his career, I think at one point in time, he was the single biggest difference maker in NBA history in terms of the on-off court metrics and the way he affected the game positively for his team. So, he was a very, very special player. I mean, I think that goes without saying here. But yeah, and so, but as I'm going through it, all these experiences are new. They're new and they're coming at you. And fortunately, I had a great staff and a great veteran team, and we worked together to get through it.
I know you probably had big plans for what you wanted to do with Dirk, and that's why you took the job initially, the potential of him and the superstar that he could be. But you were his third head coach, right? And the previous two head coaches had ideas of how to utilize him. Don Nelson had his own plan. Averie had his own plan. But whenever you got here and you got your hands on Dirk, what was your plan to get the most out of him and turn him into the player we know now?
Well, our system evolved over those 3 years. My first, second, and third year. Third year, my first year, about a little less than halfway through, I talked to Jason Kidd about doing the play calling and basically running the team. I wanted to get away from it. It was pretty clear to me that he had a great handle on the team, and that was an important moment and element at that time. And then as we went over the next year and a half into 2011, it was clear to me that I needed to, bring these guys concepts that would allow them the opportunity to make plays. We were a better team when we weren't necessarily calling plays. We were better when we were moving randomly and moving the ball randomly and were unpredictable. And so that's how it evolved, and then all the pieces fit together so well. I mean, you had Kidd, Barea, as I mentioned, Stevenson became a starter that year. And then in the finals, he went from starting to coming off the bench, and we started Barea to get another playmaker against Miami because they were so good defensively. And then Stevenson played better as a guy off the bench than he did as a starter. And, that's, that kind of thing, that's special. I mean, that's really special. And then Barea was, he had a great playoff. So, the teams that we had to beat that year, we needed a randomness to how we played offensively. We became a very good defensive team, and Tyson Chandler had a lot to do with that. And we were big. We had him. We had Brendan Haywood, and then Haywood got hurt in game 2 of the finals, and so Mahimi ended up being the guy that was playing the backup minutes, and in the decisive game, which you guys are probably referring to as the Mahimi game, he had 9 points. And he had a jumper at the end of the third quarter to put us up 9. So in Game 6, which was the deciding game. So all these guys, they all stayed ready, and they were all dialed in, and they all had a sense of the moment and what it was all about.
You referenced the Thunder and what those three guys became. They weren't that first year when you played them, as far as there's this time-honored tradition in the NBA, it seems, where a lot of teams, no matter how talented they are, they need that first run to kind of take a little bit of some lessons and lick their wounds, and then they come back and they get that proverbial experience. We're even seeing some of this with San Antonio right now, where the Knicks kind of shell-shocked them out of the gate, even though a lot of people expected San Antonio to be favored. That Knicks team, you saw them a year ago, had to learn some lessons. What does it actually look like, though, right? We hear this on the outside. Oklahoma City, the next year, they beat you guys in the first round. But playing them, a lot of the same pieces were there, but you beat them in, I believe, it's 5. What actually happens to where you could see it as a coach where, oh, this team has taken that mental leap, even when the physical ability was already there when I saw them last time?
Well, the year we played them, they were very young, and they weren't ready to really win yet. I mean, they were in the conference finals, but that was the whole thing, is that they had breathtaking young talent that could beat you if you weren't right. And what happened in that series was we won the first game, and we had Dirk had 48 points. He was 24 for 24 from the free throw line, and we won by 4 or 5 or something like that. It was a very close game. I talked to the team after that game, in between game 1 and game 2, and I cautioned everyone that we were getting seduced into playing the Thunder's game, which is a faster game. Our game was, we were fast, but we weren't as physically fast or athletic as them, and we were getting into a shot trade with them, and that was not the way for us to win the series. And so in game 2, they stole home court. I mean, it turned out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so then we're 1-1 headed to Oklahoma City, and we had some very serious discussions about, where we were, what historically, what the moment meant, and were we going to allow these guys that really weren't ready yet to take this from us. And so we had a great response in game 3. Game 4 at Oklahoma City, so we get home court back in game 3. We were way up most of the game. They made a run. It was close, and we ended up winning game 3. Game 4, we got down a bunch of points. I mean, look, if you're going to win a championship, you're going to have some games where you make some comebacks that are kind of off the hook. And the first one was game 4 against Oklahoma City. I don't remember what we were down. I think we were down 17 or 19. And back in those days, I mean, now in today's NBA, that kind of a lead or deficit isn't that much. Back then, it was more.
Mm-hmm.
We came back. We hung around. We had developed real mental and physical resolve as a team that year. And Tyson Chandler had a lot to do with it. Jason Kidd had a lot to do with it. Dirk was always very, very tough-minded. And so we essentially steal game 4, and then we're coming back home to play game 5, to move on to the finals. And in that game, they went really small. I mean, I remember Dirk was guarding Eric Maynor for a number of minutes in that game. And it was a ball buster game, and we ended up winning at the very end, but it was difficult. And so there we were, Western Conference champions, and looking forward to the finals. And I don't know if it had been decided yet who we were going to play. I think
y'all were waiting.
Miami was still playing, probably Boston. I think
was it Chicago or Boston?
I think it was Chicago. I think
it was Derrick Rose, Chicago, I think.
Okay, okay, there you go, Chicago. And so I I don't know. I think that may have gone 6 games. I don't really remember, but we had a little bit of time before all that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Miami was the story of the league that year, right? I think we all know that in terms of just everything starting with LeBron going there up until you play them. When you're preparing for them, what was the biggest challenge? Was it talent? Was it psychological? Was it just the spectacle? Although, it's the finals, there's always going to be a spectacle. What was the biggest thing you're eyeing going in as this is where we have to win?
Well, I mean, the matchups and the talent were a problem. They had 3 guys with Bosch, Wade, and James that were, these guys were all first ballot Hall of Famers. And, and so, and they had put together a roster of guys around those guys. They had shooting, they had defense, and playmaking. And so, they had a hell of a team. And yeah, the spotlight was on them all year. I know we were a big underdog headed into the series. How big, I don't remember. Game 1, we didn't play well at Miami. Game 2, we get down, I think 15 with 6 minutes to go. Wade hit a 3 or something, and then the place went crazy. And then I think we called timeout, and then we came out of the timeout, and then we went on a run, and we were able to, kind of walk the game down and get a chance to put the ball in Dirk's hands at the end. And he made a great play getting to the left-handed layup, which gave us the lead. So that was enormously huge. But a lot of people don't remember that, we came home for game 3 and lost game 3 at home, and so, and then in those days it was 2-3-2.
Yep.
Which I always thought was very difficult for the team that played the 3 home games in the middle of the series. It was something that was done in the 80s. In fact, I was a first or second year player with the Celtics, and I guess it was my first year, was 85 finals. It was the first year they did it, and they did it so that to make it more favorable for the media. So the media only had to travel, twice, to the home team's venue, then to the road, and then back to the home team's venue. So I guess 3 times instead of, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, if you go 2-2, 1-1-1. So anyway, the league was very smart getting the series back to 2-2, 1-1-1, because it just plays better. But we go home and lose game 3, and there's all this stuff going on, and Dirk had the illness, and there was all the stuff that went along with that. And game 4, he played a heroic game and hit the game winner in game 4. Game 5, we came out and played better, and Jason Terry was the closer in that game. And LeBron was chasing him around in the fourth quarter, and Jet got it going. And then so then we were up 3-2, headed to Miami.
That second half of game 3 heading into game 4 is probably the most pivotal point in this entire series to me, because at least from the outside, watching us get down in game 2 and come back and fetch them and then eventually win that one, and then doing it again the next game, being down by 14 and then coming back, it felt like no matter what Miami did, they could have the greatest first half, whatever. We're going to come back. We're going to be in this thing with 1 possession left. And that just gave me a lot of hope that no matter what happened, these guys were going to walk it down. They were going to be in the game in the last minute. I don't know if that had a psychological effect on y'all, that you could go, hey, these guys aren't better than us. We can always get back in this thing. But then the Barea decision going into the next game was huge as well. So I guess that end of game 3 going into game 4, you made a huge change. It might not seem like a huge change, but it is, with Barea and Stevenson. Just talk to me about that period and what your thought process was and why you had the confidence to throw JJ in there.
Well, Barea, it was a guy that always rose to the moment. I mean, he had been there. He'd been there all 3 years that I was there to that point. And anytime we made him a starter, played him in crunch time, whatever. I mean, he was fearless and he produced. I mean, he was a winner. He just got things done. And as we went into the series, um, you want to have some moves that you can make. Um, sometimes the right thing is to go ahead and start a guy, who's a different guy to start the series. Um, we didn't feel like matchup wise it was the right thing to do in game one. But at some point, the Berea move gave us another playmaker and another attacker, which you got to have against a great defensive team against like Miami. And so, when we went to starting Berea, Mike Bibby had to guard him, and that's a tough matchup. It became a tough matchup for Miami. And then finally, I think in game 6, they started playing Eddie House instead of Bibby, and House actually got going a little bit, but we were still able to win the game. But yeah, the Berea move was something that was in our hip pocket, that we were saving for hopefully the right moment.
Let's bring the timelines to now. We could talk about 2011 for about an hour more if we want, but you're obviously still in the league, still very successful head coach with the Indiana Pacers, but you were here and you were the head coach whenever the Jalen Brunson and Luka Doncic draft happened for the Mavs, which crazy to see where those guys' careers came from. But Jalen Brunson is the story of the league at the moment, him and Wemby. And I wanted to get your opinion of JB whenever you drafted him, and then how much he has grown over this, whatever it is, 6 years.
We're at 7 now.
He might be at 7.
7 or 8.
We're getting old. But yeah, Brunson is obviously has his team in the finals.
He was drafted at 18.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, 8.
Yeah. 8.
It's 8 years. Look, Brunson is obviously has become a great player. He's always been a winner. He's always been a great leader. There are similarities to Berea. Like Brunson's bigger, and so he's more suited to be a starting player, or the kind of player that he is probably than Berea is. But Berea started his share of games, but there are similar qualities there. I don't know if anybody could have predicted Jalen Brunson's rise to the level that he's at, to this level. But those of us that knew him are not shocked, because he has an internal wiring. He has a resourcefulness. He has a bulldog mentality. And if you're trying to prove him wrong, good luck. If you're trying to say that he can't do something, you do that at your own behest. I mean, and he's obviously proven everyone that doubted him, what the deal is. And look, that year in summer league when we drafted him, if you go back and look at his stats, he struggled in summer league. He did not have a good summer league. And so, I spoke to him afterwards and said, listen, here's what you need to do. You need to become a more effective driver of the ball, and you've got to be able to make 3-point shots. He was such a mid-range player, and he made some college threes, when he was at Villanova, but the line is quite a bit closer. And I don't know how many threes he made in the summer league. I don't know if he made any. He didn't statistically stand out at all. But this kid went home for 6 or 7 weeks and then came back in the fall, and it was like a different player. I mean, and when you talk about greatness in players, they all have a wiring of resourcefulness, that they figure things out, that they just have that it factor, and Brunson's one of those guys.
Last time we saw your team fully healthy, they were in the NBA Finals. Now, I know you don't get to carry any of that forward, and last year's success or even 2 years ago's success doesn't mean anything. But what are your expectations for the Pacers this season, given full health, hopefully?
We're looking forward to it. health is a major part of it. Tyrese Halliburton is doing very, very well with his recovery. He's really fully recovered from the Achilles. He dealt with shingles, in February, March, and April. It was a thing that lingered somewhat, but he's doing great now. Pascal Siakam is our other great player. Nemhard is he's kind of a Barea, Deshaun Stevenson, and you combine, I don't know, Jason Terry. He can score, he can defend, he can make plays. He's kind of our combo guy that does those kinds of things. And then we have Neesmith, and we traded for Zubats. So we like our team. It's this past season was difficult, but we got a lot of work in with development, and we learned a lot about our young players. And so we've got to take that forward into training camp. And obviously we're looking forward to getting a healthy team back on the court.
You have time for a few rapid fire before we get you out of here?
Yeah, go ahead.
The moment you knew that the Mavs were going to win the 2011 finals, like in game 6, when were you like, we got this thing?
Yeah, there was a play where Wade lost the ball out of bounds across from our bench. And I think we were up 8 at the time, and it was 2 minutes to go, or 2.5, something like that. And I didn't know we were going to win, but it just, the energy of the game was going our direction.
Better Dirk finals game winner, game 2 or game 4?
Oh, I think you'd have to say game 2 was the most important one of really the history of the Mavericks organization. If you really want to be honest about it, because you go down 0-2, the metrics of playoff series will tell you that it's very, very difficult. The team that goes up 2-0 wins like 80% of the time.
Right.
So that was enormous. And then it became a 5-game series, and we figured it out from there.
I know the most fun game for the fans during that playoff run, besides game 6, was the game 4 against the Lakers, right? Just could not miss. For you as a coach, what game was most fun for you on that playoff run, besides obviously winning the championship in game 6?
Yeah. Game 6 of Miami certainly was the game. I thought game 6 at Portland was a really big moment for us. We had been up big in game 4 and lost the lead, and they tied the series 2-2. And it was a very important moment, and I remember, after that game, I said to the team, I said, listen, I'm gonna take responsibility for this with the media. I said, tomorrow's Easter. You guys get away from this, get rested, and we're gonna come back on, I think it was Monday that we played, and I said, we're better than this team, and we're gonna come back, and we're gonna win game 5, and then we're gonna have a chance to come back here, and look, fortunately, all that stuff worked out. So, game 6, Portland, it wrapped the series up. It was important to win our first series, obviously, to get to advance to the next series. But that was a highly pressurized series and a very difficult matchup, so, and look, everything is hard.
Yeah.
Anything in the playoffs is hard. Like when I was watching that game, I was talking to you guys about where, the Lakers are playing Sacramento. And if Sacramento somehow wins that game, we play New Orleans, who's a much better matchup for us. It's just, those things, it's just not going to happen. Bryant's going to hit the shot. We're going to go to overtime, and we're going to end up playing Portland, And so, but for us, it was probably a blessing that it was a more difficult opponent, and it got us more ready for the Lakers.
Everybody remembers Dirk's immediate reaction to winning a title. What was yours? Buzzer sounds, game 6. You've been in the league you've been coaching this league since the 80s. You had been a head coach for more than 10 years. you win a ring. First thoughts that wash through your mind when you realized this actually happened?
Yeah, we were so immersed in the process that we had put forth of how we are going to beat this team. And it was about a certain mindset offensively and a certain persistence defensively. And we were so immersed in it that when the game was finally over, it was kind of like, God, I can't believe this is over. You know, we were so focused on what we were doing from a process standpoint. But I just remember, Mark came and we had a big hug, and I told him how happy I was for him because this was something that was very, very important to him. This was something that he wanted more than anything to do for the fan base, and he did. And and from there it was a really cool night.
I bet. Best Dirk story you've been holding on to all these years.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not going to get into private stories, but I just yeah, I just was so fortunate to get a chance to work with him. I mean, he still is really one of the more underrated guys in the history of the game, and when you look at everything that he did for not just for the Mavericks organization, but he's the guy that changed the game. And the guys that change the game, they are different. And Dirk gets a lot of respect, but I don't know if he ever has gotten as much respect as he probably deserves. I mean, he redefined the power forward position. Because of him, every team eventually had a shooting four-man, and that was not the case prior to that. And so, when you get a guy that changes the game, I mean, that's historic.
Role player, whether 2011 or any other time in your time in Dallas, the role player you had that you trusted the absolute most to go out and do what you need him to do?
Well, we had a lot of guys, and really, what, just Dallas?
Just Dallas, we'll say. We're a Dallas show.
Sure.
We'll say Dallas show.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Barea. I mean,
Yeah.
Barea he was always up to the moment. He really was. And there was a feistiness to him. And he was a worker. He played at Northeastern, like it wasn't the Yankee Conference anymore, but maybe it was the ECAC North or something like that. And then I had heard stories, it was before I got to Dallas, that they had put him in the G League a couple of times to play games. He go to the G League and scored like 40 points. I mean, he was a baller, and he was fearless. And so I put him up there with anybody. Now, Jason Terry was a sixth man. And so, but I really view him as a starter.
Right. Close games.
But Barea and Terry were two of the most dependable players you could ever possibly hope for off the bench. And I think the other guy to mention here is Cardinal, because as the series went on, the matchups became more difficult, and Peja was having difficulty with some of the matchups with the wings, and so we started playing Cardinal. And the other thing that happened in Game 6, and this is really noteworthy, is that Dirk got 2 quick fouls in Game 6, had to come out of the game. Now, we were either down 5 when he came out of the game or down 7. I forget which. But Cardinal came in the game, and when Dirk came back in the game at the beginning of the second period, we were up 7. So Cardinal went plus 12 when Dirk went out of the game with foul trouble. And then Cardinal in the second half took a charge, I think, on Wade or one of those guys, and hit a big 3. And so, you look at Cardinals plus minus in Game 6, it was impressive.
This got me, the Dick Motta thing this summer, him not getting into the Hall of Fame, got me thinking about this. But the most underrated head coach in NBA history, in your opinion?
Well, Mott is very deserving. Look, I was president of the Coaches Association for 20 years. I finally stepped aside this year. JB Bickerstaff is doing it now, and I've been very involved with the Hall of Fame. Working to get some of these guys in. Bill Fitch finally got in 2019. I mean, he was a guy that was a franchise builder that built every franchise from lottery to either NBA Finals or conference finals. Mata had similar impact. There are just so many. I mean, look, when you advocate for coaches, the way that I did over a 20-year period as president of the association, I feel every coach is underrated. I just really think, it's a special privilege to be an NBA coach.
Well, Coach, thank you so much for your time.
Sir, thank you.
Appreciate you today. Thank you for 2011. I hope you have a glass of wine or whatever, and sit back and think about those days again in this coming week. But I appreciate you so much, Rick.
Yeah, no problem. It was a pleasure to join you guys, and best wishes.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.